A while back, someone suggested I should read stuff, and so I'm gonna try it out today. Gonna start with a bit of classic literature. Heavy Lovin' by Clock Crew. A round of Team Fortress 2 leaves a heavy and medic alone and bored. I wrote a TF2 fanfic. Enjoy. The game started as the players rushed out of the spawn. The red team ran out sadly to discover the other team wasn't there. The heavy said to the medic, "What do we do now?" After hearing this, the medic proceeds to unzip his pants. The heavy screams out in joy, "I love this doctor!" The heavy's gargantuan cock is pushed slowly into the medic's tight asshole, slowly stretching wider to accommodate the heavy's raging erection. The medic's moans and groans did nothing but make the heavy's dick harder. Eventually the medic's anus could no longer stretch anymore, as it fit the heavy's man-meat like a fleshly anal glove. The engineer sees their fun. It got him so hot, he didn't know what to do. He whipped out his throbbing junk and started jerking his one-eyed wonder weasel. Unfortunately, his self-love accidentally catches the heavy's attention. The engineer stepped out. The heavy and the medic had thought they were caught. The engineer stepped out and said, "Erecting a dispenser." The heavy continued to plow the medic's ass as the engineer had fun with his mouth. It lasted over an hour. Endless anal stretching and constant bouts of cum, but neither of the three could stop being erect. The only one who had not came was the medic. Then suddenly, "I'm fully charged!" The engineer and the heavy get out of the way as he came with such force that the poor unsuspecting scout took a liter of cum, hit him in the face. The three men began having fun once more as the medic stuck his dick in the heavy's ass and the engineer began having fun with the heavy's dick using his mouth. The scout walked into the room, seeing the all-man menage a trois, and promptly yelled, "Need a dispenser here!" The engineer looked at the scout who had his pants down and was bent over a desk. He walked up to the scout and began to stick his cock in the scout's unusually tight anus. When he stopped, the scout turned around and started giving the engineer a blowjob as smoke surrounded him. "Spy, sapping my sentry!" Suddenly the spy brandished his butterfly knife, cutting off the engineer's cock. Due to the mass amount of blood flowing to that vital appendage, the engineer promptly fell unconscious. Storing the cock in his coat pocket for later, he continued to cut off the cocks of the medic and the heavy, again keeping the members for himself. The spy had fun that night. So that was a lovely story. It's a classic among the TF2 community. And just for fun, I shall read an additional fanfiction that I feel also has a lot of heart and soul put into it. So let's begin. Camper, Sniper X Demo Man by Batolio. CP Gravel Pit was always a struggle. The blue team had 7 minutes to capture the final point on top of the rickety tower bearing a futuristic-looking laser on its top. A spy had attempted to capture the point only to have his intestines sliced out of his body by a base jumper demo man with a Scottish skullcracker leaping up to the point with the assistance of his sticky bomb launcher. The Frenchman's consciousness began to fade while he stepped back, missing a second swing from the angry black man and falling off the edge of the platform to meet his ultimate fate on the ground. Satisfied with his work, the demo man planted 2 more damageless sticky bombs down and propelled himself back near the spawn to wait for any other unsuspecting prey to ambush on the point. "Good work!" bellowed the heavy weapons guy, who gave a thumbs up while rushing out of spawn along with an engineer carrying a tool case containing a sentry. "We gotta get to that there point. Cover me, Heavy," commanded the Engie. The Russian followed his comrade up the ramp to the point, only once taking the time to rev up his minigun and fire a few stray bullets in the direction of a scout who regretted poking his head out from the opening leading to the A point. "Bah, bloody useless," the sniper perched by spawn grumbled. His sneer caught the demo man's attention. "Oi, and what do you think you're used for?" he replied in a drunken stupor. "I've been jumping up and down, slicing spies, and been keeping that point safe while you just camped here. Ain't no one likes a camper." "Maybe if you didn't jump around like a crazed lunatic, I'd be able to focus my shot, you drunken hooligan." They took a step closer to one another. "And I bet if you got out of your hidey hole, you would have killed someone by now. My job is to stay behind the lines and attack from afar, you bombshell-lobbing wanker." "That's just 'cause you can't hit for shit, Campy. Ye arms are like noodles, the both of 'em." Fed up with the demo's taunting, the sniper left his post, then marched to the point. "I'll show you who's noodle-armed," he wailed, tossing his sniper rifle aside and pulling out his kukri. For a few seconds he examined the weapons with pride. Kukris were his favorite knife, and made him feel badass. He liked the curve of the blade and how it gleamed in the sun. Then he pulled out a glass bottle filled with a peculiar-smelling yellow liquid. Anyone unfortunate enough to be bathed in its warm, golden glory would instantly know the substance the sniper kept on him for the rare situation when he's on the offense. When he nearly reached the top of the very end of the innermost ramp just before the split that led to the platform itself, he noticed smoke seeping around a friendly scout and how sluggish the boy's movements were. The Boston boy wasn't carrying the babyface's blaster on him, which tipped off the sniper who was really running up the platform. "Spy!" he called out, chucking the glass jar straight into the boy's back. The resulting screams of disgust confirmed his suspicions with almost no effort at all. He flicked his wrist and brought the kukri down through the spy's skull. "Game, set, match, mate," he taunted, and then walked back to the spawn where the demo stood, drinking the usual bottled sludge he's become accustomed to. "Feels good, doesn't it, lassie? The heat of the battle, eh?" he inquired. Bloody spies." The sniper shrugged, picked up his sniper rifle, and peered through the scope. When the demo man left, the announcer declared that there were still 5 minutes left. Seconds later, another scout, just as slow as the first, ran out from the rightmost exit from the sniper's perspective on the left side, leaving spawn. Still feeling some energy in him, he set his weapons down gentler than before and grabbed an empty jar from his pocket, unzipped his pants, closed his eyes, and waited. And he waited. After a minute, he realized nothing happened. Usually it only takes half a minute to fill up a jar, but now there wasn't a drop coming out. This worried the sniper, who looked around for a friendly medic to ask. One that he saw was rushing up behind the heavy weapons guy who, before the sniper could even call for the doctor, felt a sharp pain of a knife through the back and collapsed on the floor. What was formerly the medic disappeared and reappeared later as the engineer. The sniper pushed harder, while keeping an eye on the offending Engie, only to spot another engineer wearing the same cosmetics rushing out from a different opening and immediately stabbing a friendly pyro. Then out of the ether came another spy who didn't even bother to disguise when rushing over and shooting at a scout. Bloody hell! He panicked. Sweat began trickling down his forehead as more spies seemed to flood the area. Screams from his friends echoed through the air while he still struggled to pee inside an empty jar. He pushed more, but nothing came out still. Another heavy died. He tried thinking about water, floods, river, pee itself, but to no success. A medic was stabbed, even started punching the areas where his kidney were, but it only resulted in a puff of air and a shriek of a scout from the distance. A few spies were on the ground level making their way up the first ramp. He knew he wasn't fast enough to reach, but remembered a soldier had died several seconds earlier and would soon respawn. If he could manage to throw the Girardi at the spies, that soldier might be able to rocket jump up and finish them off with some mini-crits. His knuckles whitened from their grasp on the jar, and with a huff, he pulled his pants completely down, firmly slammed the glass onto the floor, squatted down over the opening, and gave a firm push unlike the previous ones, resulting in a slew of rancid, half-solid substances coating the bottom of the jar. Even he had to hold his nose when looking at it, and his fingers twitched from being so close to such unimaginable horrors, with only some easily breakable glass separating them and the most distinct uncomfort they could think of at the moment. Still, he wasn't satisfied with how little he made. A good karate jar is filled to the brim, not halfway. He tried spitting in the opening, but made no noticeable difference. During his efforts, he took in an especially big whiff of the concoction and felt a horrid emptiness in his stomach and a burning sensation in his throat. The surrounding area started to become blurry before everything snapped back into focus, and he heaved the contents of his stomach all over his hand, managing to get some in the jar. Now it was 3/4 of the way full, and was made of colors that shouldn't have been seen by the human eye. Briefly, he thought of asking a scout to lend him some of that salty-smelling mad milk he sometimes chucks at enemies, but saw that the boy was out fighting and was soon turned to Swiss cheese by at least 4 spies all firing at him. "More fluid," he grumbled. "I need more fluid." He yelled in panic and looked around. What other secretions does the body make? He couldn't imagine himself jerking off into the jar, nor did he feel any pee in its bladder yet. Tears? Sweat? No. Blood! One of the trinity of excretions from labor, he began running over the ramp, keeping the jar and its fumes close to his chest, while repeatedly slicing at the arm holding it with his kukri. Crimson liquid poured out the deep wounds and began ever so slowly filling up the jar. "1 minute left in the mission," the announcer said. Not enough was pouring out. He couldn't cut off his arm completely because it was still holding on to the jar. Instead, all he could do was make the wound deeper and deeper. A spy managed to touch foot on the point. Faster he ran, cutting off more flesh from his arm. Desperately, he pushed his nose close to the opening of the jar and sliced that off too, complete with a horrid scream and tears welling in his eyes that threatened to blind him. His lips, the flesh on his cheeks, and also part of his chin also plopped into the jar with gushes of blood. At this point he was stumbling, half blind, fully dazed as the last spy set foot on the point. All 8 of the French bastards who massacred his team were threatening to take control when the sniper tipped out the side, barely managing to grab onto the side of the door at the expense of the jar he held, which fell to his feet with an ear-shattering crack. He looked down and saw the contents he sacrificed so much to assemble laying among the broken glass on the creaky wood below, and screamed loud enough that even the spies, cold and heartless, looked down with concerns and then horror as they saw a man, covered in blood redder than any uniform his comrades wore, yelling incoherently over a broken mess of something that looked as if Satan himself would produce. One spy even threw up on the point. Through the curtain of blood masking his vision, the sniper saw all the spies and began dipping his hands into the mess, collecting as much as he could, keeping his fingers together tightly to prevent even the liquidy fluids that have resulted from it seeping out. Some glass stabbed into his fingers and palms, resulting in more blood, but he didn't mind. Another scream left his lungs as he ran up the last ramp and shoved it all into the face of the unfortunate spy who was closest to the sniper at the moment. Copious amounts of fecal matter and blood shoved the cigarette he smoked deep into the man's trachea, cutting off his air supply. That spy clawed at his face both from the shock of the smell and the lack of air, coughing up some particles into the face of another spy who immediately threw up from the sensation. One brave spy pulled out his knife and tried to stab the sniper, only to be slapped in the face by the most dirty hand possible, and recoiling in horror as he felt the contents seep into his skin as if it would become permanent like a tattoo. The kukri lodged itself into the clogged mouth of the first spy by the sniper's will, and then immediately into the eye of a fourth spy. The feces seemed to eat away at the flesh around it, and if the spy had managed to stay on the platform long enough, the sniper might have been able to see the result. One other spy jumped off himself, preferring the broken legs to whatever unholy horrors the sniper had in store for him. The unusual, puffy provocateur of the most fancy spy who was drenched when the sniper turned around, eyes bloodshot underneath the river blood pouring from his sockets, who then opened his mouth and forced what must have been several pounds of half-digested food and bile into the chest of that spy, complete with some of the blood that had gotten into his mouth during the whole ordeal. That spy threw up on himself and on the sniper, who then upchucked even more contents from his body in response until only the searing acid that lined his stomach left his mouth. A firm hand grabbed onto his bleeding head, and the blade of his kukri was shoved deep into that spy's stomach before the whole body was tossed, fluids and all, onto the only clean spy left on the point. He was petrified from the horrors that were before him. Silently, he even prayed that one of the other red mercs would rush up and put a bullet or a rocket through his skull so he'd be back at spawn and far away from what the grotesque display of bodily functions that happened before him. Luck was not on his side, as his arm was grabbed by the bloodied, shitty hands of the sniper and broken in an unusual angle while the body was slammed onto the floor below. In the wind, it was possible to faintly hear the announcer giving the final countdown over the horrid ringing that dominated his ears. Inhuman gurgled sounds from the sniper, who couldn't speak over the blood flooding his throat and dripped down into the spy's mouth. The last thing he saw was a stream of red and yellow covering his face, pulling in his lungs, and the resulting blackness that followed. All the spies were dead, and the announcer declared the red team the victor. For a moment, the sniper snapped back into reality and saw the horrors only a few seconds could rot in war. Then to the left of him, a voice so cheery it might as well have been alien assaulted his ears. "That's the way you do it!" The Demoman had respawned, launched himself up, and gave the sniper as assuring a thumbs up as any other. It's really wonderful to read such fantastic tales and such wonderful stories written by the people in the TF2 community. We can only hope that other communities are able to write such wonderful stories, but I don't think anyone will be as imaginative or interesting as the people that the wonderful game Team Fortress 2 is able to produce. Anyways, thanks for watching the video. I hope I gave you something I gave it too seriously. Hope I gave you something to think about and otherwise entertained you. Take care.